What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episode 4 of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, an episode called Seven, directed by Sarah Adina Smith and written by Zezia Barnes, Annie Julia Wyman, and series co-creator Ira Parker. And as you can probably gather from the sound of my voice, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, but it doesn't matter because that was one hell of an episode of television, easily the best episode of the season. Let me think about this for a moment. I think it might be the best piece of new entertainment that I've seen in 2026 in the world of film and television, because 2026 has been a thoroughly rotten year when it comes to movies so far, and I've been kind of desperately searching for some cool movies or some cool shows. And thank God this episode arrived when it did, because when you're sick and you're lying on the sofa and you don't want to move, there is nothing better than a great show to binge. Also, if you're a fan of the show and you're wondering why I'm talking about it on Friday instead of Sundays, because the Winter Olympics as well as the Super Bowl are coming this weekend, so in their infinite wisdom, HBO Max decided to drop the episode a couple days early. They dropped it at 3 this morning, so hell yeah, thank God it's Friday. But before I get to the individual ingredients that I so thoroughly enjoyed this episode, let's talk big picture for a second, because when it comes to film and television, I've always had a weird relationship with film and television where I'm a little bit like a junkie looking for their fix. And the fix that I'm looking for are the waves of chills up and down your arm and neck when basically like the music and the performances and the writing and the photography, where all the separate ingredients stir together for this like magical, potent concoction that just hits you much like a drug or a really strong drink, and you just get a real physical response. And so while on an intellectual level, I can praise the writing or I can call attention to an individual performance, what I really crave is just that rush of sensation that film and television can deliver when everything is firing on all cylinders. And within this episode, there were at least 3 or 4 separate occasions where I experienced that sensation. And so as much as I might enjoy getting up on my high horse and pontificating about what the show's getting right, what the show's getting wrong, blah, 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 yada, 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 in the end, what we crave is a heightened sense of emotional experience. And this episode absolutely delivered on that front. But now that I've embarrassed and shamed myself by admitting how emotional I got while watching this episode, it is time to get into some details and some spoilers. So if you've not yet seen the episode, head over to HBO Max, check it out. And if you're more of a traditional cable person, well, then you can watch it on Sunday at the usual time.
Who will stand and fight with me as courage deserted the noble houses of Westeros? And there are no true knights among you!
Let's start with the obvious. At the end of the previous episode, we got the great revelation that Egg is in fact Aegon V. And for all you buffs and nerds and connoisseurs out there who enjoy digging into the weeds of Westeros history and the line of succession and so on and so forth, to put it in context in relation to the other shows, the Mad King, who was killed by Jaime Lannister, that is the grandson of Aegon V. And basically, how can I say this without going into spoilers? Let's just, for people who are curious about the history of Aegon V and Duncan the Tall, all that information is available online. But Aegon V's reign is cut short for reasons that I will not go into, which leads to his son reigning for about 3 years. And then we get the Mad King, which just ends in disaster and civil war, which allows Robert Baratheon to take the Iron Throne. But if you're curious about Egg's family and his lineage, etc. and so forth, right now in the context of the show A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, it's highly unlikely that Egg will ever sit on the Iron Throne. He's got a lot of people in front of him in terms of the line of succession, because King Daeron II, or King Daeron the Good, is on the throne. And he has 4 sons. Baelor, who we see a great deal of in this episode, who I fucking love, Aerys, Rhaegal, and Maekar. And Maekar is the father of Egg. And Egg has 3 older brothers, and I've got them all written down right here. So his older brothers are Daeron, who's a huge drunk, who keeps having all these dreams about Duncan the Tall, followed by Aerion, who is the total psychopath who's breaking the fingers of the puppeteer. Then we have Aemon, and Aemon people will recognize from the original Game of Thrones TV show, because he is Maester Aemon, who is up at the Night's Watch, who is old as balls during Game of Thrones, but that is in fact Egg's older brother. And then Aegon comes after him, and then he has 2 younger sisters, Daela and Rhae. But as we're all acutely aware, when it comes to George R.R. Martin and his fictional realm of Westeros, accidents happen, strange things happen. When it comes to the line of succession, there can be civil war, there can be suicide, there can be murder, there can be all sorts of crazy shit that can happen in a very short span of time. Like think about in Game of Thrones, how many people did we see sit on the Iron Throne in a very short period of time? Like we saw Robert, and then we saw Joffrey, and then we saw Tommen, then we saw Cersei, and did we see? Oh, and then we eventually saw Daenerys. But it's like, that seat hardly has a chance to cool off before somebody else is sitting in it. And the same will eventually hold true for the character of Egg. And I have to say that the actor Dexter Soul Ansel, who plays Egg, he continues to impress me. I think his acting in this episode, as well as the acting of Peter Claffey, who plays Dunk, I think the best acting either of them have displayed all season was in this episode. Early on, when Egg is forced to apologize to Dunk for lying to him, or at least he's asked by Baylor to apologize for deceiving him. But just seeing the way that like tears were welling up around the edge of his eyes as he was making his apology, because all he wants is to be a squire. He has no idea what the future is going to hold for him. He just likes tournaments. He likes watching guys fight. He loves this shit. He eats it up. He wants to be big, tall, and strong, just like Dunk, and be a strong, bold, honorable knight, etc. and so forth. He didn't want to miss the tournament, and so he did whatever he had to do in order to get there. And just seeing how wounded he is, that due to his carelessness, that Dunk is in this horrible predicament where he might be put on trial and possibly butchered or have his hands chopped off or his teeth knocked out or whatever the case might be. You can tell that Egg is just, he's feeling a lot of guilt over this unexpected turn of events. And I've said it before in previous videos, but even if I have a laundry list of complaints about changes to the source material, when it comes to the casting of Peter Claffey and Dexter Soul Ansel as Dunk and Egg, just absolute Hall of Fame casting, pitch perfect, home run, they just nailed it. And if Dunk and Egg are more or less being adapted or portrayed in a faithful way, well then everything else can be fixed. And I feel like this episode, apart from one notable exception toward the end, which I'll get to in a second, it was by far the most faithful episode yet when it comes to adapting the text. But it also ended on the most kick-ass cliffhanger you could possibly imagine as Baelor Breakspear Targaryen rides into the theme song from Game of Thrones and offers to fight on Dunk's side in this trial by 7. I was just like, in front of the TV, like, just flexed. I was so fucking happy that they nailed his character so well, because as much as I like Dunk and Egg, my favorite character in the novella, or at least the first novella, The Hedge Knight, in this collection, is Baelor Breakspear Targaryen. And because I spent so much time lavishing praise on Peter Claffey and Dexter Soul Ansel for the portrayal of Dunk and Egg, let's pause for a moment and appreciate Bertie Carvel, who plays Baelor Breakspear Targaryen. He is just fucking incredible in the role, and he was part of yet another scene which gave me goosebumps the size of grapefruits. Early on in the episode, Dunk is brought before Baelor to basically explain his side of the story of what went down, because Darren has been claiming to his father Maekar that basically while he was drunk, some like robber knight came in and kidnapped Egg, and so everybody basically wants to put Dunk to death as quickly as humanly possible or chop off a lot of his body parts. But Baelor is very fair and very just and very wise. He's the hand of the king. He wants to hear what Dunk has to say, but after he hears his explanation, he keeps asking him, "How good a knight are you?" or "How good a knight are you truly?" And when he said that, they cut to the title of the show as the music started to swell, and I was just like, woo! I was just feeling the chills going all through me, because not only is it a very faithful adaptation of the text, but it's also performed and delivered to absolute perfection by Bertie Carvel. And if people could find a way to take that euphoria I'm feeling when watching a good show or a good movie and bottle it and put it on a rack at the drugstore, I would rapidly run out of money. But the reality is, only really good storytellers know how to concoct that strange alchemical process where, once again, the writing and the performances and the photography and the editing and the music, they all stir together into this strange mixture where suddenly you get a real chemical, emotional response, and I just absolutely love it. And that's why for the last 30 years, I've been obsessively watching film and television. But another performance I'm really enjoying is that by Sam Spruell, who plays Egg's father, Maekar Targaryen. And his performance is not giving me chills, but it makes me laugh, because when Dunk demands a trial by combat, I think Aerion very quickly sizes him up and realizes, oh, holy shit, like this guy's like nearly 7 feet tall, big as shit, and he demands
a trial of 7.
What the fuck is a trial of 7?
And a trial by 7 is an ancient custom that goes way back to the arrival of the Andals in Westeros, long before the Targaryens ever got there. But I love how Maekar is just so completely disgusted that his son Aerion doesn't have the faith and confidence in his own abilities as a knight or as a fighter to beat this lowly hedge knight, because while Dunk might be built like a brick shithouse, Aerion has enjoyed the benefits of being trained by the best his entire life. He should be able to take down Dunk, no problem. However, he demands this trial by 7, and Maekar's like, what the fuck is a trial by 7? Anyway, he's bringing some much needed humor to the show and what is otherwise a very sincere, earnest, kind of heartfelt show. But it also shows that Aerion, while he might be a psychopath or a sociopath or whatever you want to call him, he's no dumb and he knows his history of Westeros. Also, I got to be very careful about not revealing what happens to Aerion during the Trial by Seven over the next 2 episodes. But for people who are really curious about the history of Westeros and the history of the Targaryens, all I'll say is that the final fate of Aerion is as interesting and bizarre and twisted as nearly any final fate by any of the Targaryens that you care to mention, from Aegon the Conqueror up through Daenerys Targaryen. Also, speaking of Aerion being a sick and twisted fuck, I was relieved to see that they decided to include the little anecdote shared by Egg about what Aerion did to him in his bedroom a few years back, because, as we all know, the Targaryens from time to time like to marry their siblings or their cousins, or whatever the case might be, and Aerion slipped into Egg's bed one night, held a knife between his legs, and said that he was going to basically castrate him and turn him into a sister so that he can marry him. And maybe that's just Aerion's way of being the abusive older brother, or maybe he really meant it. But the way Egg tells the story, you're not quite sure just how sane or just how irrational or just how sick and twisted Aerion might be. And for every Targaryen out there like Baelor, who's very pure and noble and honorable, like anytime a Targaryen's born, you basically can basically like toss a coin, and they're either going to come out batshit crazy or a total badass motherfucker. Or in the case of Egg's oldest brother, Darren, who's a complete and total degenerate alcoholic, he has that rare ability that every once in a while pops up on the Targaryens, where he's able to dream little fragments of the future. And if you read like Fire and Blood or A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, like every 50 or 60 years, one of the Targaryens will have a little bit of that ability. And in this episode, Darren takes Dunk aside and tells him that he had a dream, and nearly all of his dreams always come true. But in that dream, there was a horrible fire, but there was also a monstrous dead dragon, and Dunk was standing there. And whether or not he was responsible for killing the dragon or not, Darren couldn't say, but he basically warns Dunk that both the fire and the dead dragon are going to be a big part of his future. And as somebody who has read this book and read a lot of other George R. R. Martin's material, let's just say that Darren is not far from the mark. But then for the rest of the episode, we basically see Dunk and Egg trying to find 6 other knights that'll join Dunk's side in this trial by 7. But he's got a few things working for him. A lot of these knights have a bone to pick with the Targaryens, but also if a knight's cause is just, it shouldn't be but so difficult to find other knights that are willing to join their side. And if they're dead asleep and dead drunk and they're a little bit irritable, even better, because if you wake them up in the middle of the night and tell them they got to fight like in an hour or so, they're going to be pissed and mean and angry and ready to throw down. And on Aerion's side, we have his father, Maekar. There are going to be 3 knights from the Kingsguard. And, of course, we also have Steffon Fossaway, who originally, while he's wasted, tells Dunk that he's going to be on his side. And he's like, oh, the Targaryens, they don't have dragons anymore. Like, I'm not afraid of them. But when he's offered a lordship, he decides to switch sides, which prompts his cousin Raymond to ask Dunk to knight him. And then we get a great little tease, or a great little hint. I've always suspected that Sir Duncan the Tall was never officially knighted by Sir Arlen of Pennytree. We don't really know whether or not they actually did the official ritual. And we can see how he's initially hesitating to say the words to Raymond, but then luckily he's saved in the nick of time. He's summoned away to go talk to somebody, and Lionel, the Laughing Storm Baratheon, he steps in, and there's this cool sequence where as the Laughing Storm is basically having Raymond say his vows, we get this great voiceover narration, and it's almost like Dunk, as he's hearing those words, he's experiencing his official knighting as well, or at least that's how I interpreted the scene. But we get another great scene where Steely Pate finally delivers the finished shield to Dunk. And Tansel, not only did she manage to finish the painting on the shield, Steely Pate decided to replace the rim. He made it a little heavier, a little sturdier, but also, who cares if it's a little heavier? Because Dunk, he is big as shit. He can carry a heavy shield, and so that'll definitely serve him well in the battle to come. But as far as the rest of the lineup is concerned on the 2 teams, Aerion's older brother Darren is being forced to fight on Aerion's side. However, Darren's a drunk, he doesn't like to fight, and he confidentially asks Dunk, you know what, I'm not going to fight that hard, just knock me out quickly, and you'll basically only be going up against 6 knights instead of 7. But on Dunk's side, Sir Humphrey, even though he broke his leg when Aerion skewered his horse in the joust the previous day, he's like, as long as I can sit on a horse, you've got me on your side. So he'll be good until he won't be useful at all. But Sir Robin with the one eye, who was introduced at the beginning of the previous episode, he also joins Dunk's side. But then the big question is, who's going to be the final member of their team, which leads to the best scene of the season so far, where Dunk is basically chastising everybody there, and he's like, A knight defends the innocent. That's all I did. Because we've seen over and over countless examples of just how easily and just how quickly knights can be corrupted with promises of land or titles or marriage. Like Stefan was on Dunk's side until he was offered a lordship and then immediately joined the other side. And I was thinking to myself, like, goddamn, this scene is so perfect, and Dunk is chastising everybody for not knowing what a knight's supposed to stand for. And then in the stand, we see one person standing up, and I thought we were about to get a big inspirational moment. And then we had the one flaw in the episode where it's a little bit like the writers of the show are uncomfortable with or embarrassed by sincerity or genuine, heartfelt, like inspirational emotion. Because rather than saying, like, I'll fight for you or whatever the case might be, he rips a huge fart. And that not only does it not come from the source material, it clashes with the tone of the show. Like Game of Thrones is a much more kind of crude and vulgar show. When you read A Song of Ice and Fire, there's a lot more like kind of vulgarity kind of sprinkled throughout. And it's very appropriate for the story that George R. Martin is telling. But the way he wrote this, nearly all that vulgarity is gone. It's a much more pure and noble story. And the writers of the show just don't quite seem to know what the tone of the text is and how everything they add to the show should be in service of that tone or reinforce that tone. So the fart was the one big flaw for this episode. But then the show totally redeems itself when Baelor Breakspear rolls in on his horse looking like the scariest motherfucker you've ever seen. And his brother Maekar is like, brother, like, what the fuck? What are you doing? And then Baelor very calmly and very confidently responds, let the gods decide if he was right or wrong. But here's the deal. For all of you out there who have siblings, especially siblings that are close in age, when siblings fight, it can get pretty goddamn gnarly. And as we're aware from House of the Dragon, aka Fire and Blood, when Targaryen siblings fight, it can get particularly gruesome. So even though you've got the Kingsguard on the other side, and in theory, the Kingsguard, they're not supposed to attack any members of the royal family, which is going to make the battle very complicated. But obviously, you've got Daeron, Aerion, Maekar, and Baelor, all of whom are related, all if they're on the battlefield. So it's going to get very complicated very quickly. At any rate, I've been talking quite a bit at this point, and I'm running the risk of having this video about the episode be longer than the episode itself. And I have a general rule when it comes to commentary about movies or shows where the commentary about an individual movie or an episode of a show should never be longer than the show or movie itself, because I feel like if the showrunners and the storytellers can tell their story within a confined space, well, then people doing commentary should also be able to do the same. But I wanted to plug one last show in the realm of fantasy that I've been watching recently. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this video, I've been really frustrated over the last few months by seeing way too many terrible movies. I go to the theater once, twice, sometimes 3 times a week, and I see basically just like, one terrible movie after another, and it just like, it bleeds me dry. Like the same way I feel that rush of emotion when I'm seeing a good show or movie, when I see something terrible, it just kind of sucks the life out of me like a fucking vampire. But what's been kind of preserving my sanity over the last couple of months, every night I watch anywhere between like 1 and 3 episodes of different animated shows from Japan. Most people call them anime, but I call them anime. But if you're a fan of the fantasy genre, in particular if you're a fan of Dungeons and Dragons, kind of the late 80s, early 90s era, there's a fantasy show which I saw recently which just blew my fucking mind, Record of Lodoss War. And it's basically like everything that's cool about D&D, specifically Dragonlance from the late 80s, kind of filtered through the lens and the style and basically like kind of the tone and the intensity of like one of the coolest animated shows from Japan that I've ever seen. So if you love A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms and want more fantasy in your life but are looking for something that's quite different, I think it came out in 1990 and it's just 1 season. And there's later on another adaptation of that source material, but it's a self-contained season. You can watch it on Crunchyroll. If you're a D&D fan or a George R. Martin fan or just an anime fan in general, Record of Lodoss War is another show that gets my highest possible recommendation. But I think with that, it's time to wrap up this video. Hope you enjoyed my commentary. If so, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell. Hope everybody has a great weekend, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.